On Culture Talk this evening, we have some guests, and I am about to introduce the first one. He's Mr. Jeremy Francis. I will introduce him, and he's a special and important guy, particularly these days, and he will tell us why. And he was my guest, and would you believe he went out and brought his own guests? Well. There are some guys like that. Jeremy Francis, welcome to Culture Talk and Talk City 91.1 FM.
Good evening, sir.
How are you?
I am quite well.
Yeah, it's good to know that you're quite well. You are one of the founding members of, is it the Neurodiversity Organization or Foundation? Correct me, please.
The Neurodiversity Foundation.
The Neurodiversity Foundation. Right. For how long has the foundation been going?
So the foundation was only launched in October 2023, so we're quite young, but our focus really has been, as we have just started, on awareness and raising the profile for neurodiversity in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's why we are here.
Yeah, but why the interest in, well, before that, let me ask the other question, and for the benefit of the listeners, what exactly is neurodiversity?
So the easiest way to explain it is to say that no two people think alike, and there are a group of people that think in a very particular way. So neurodiversity looks at the way that people see the world, and it recognizes that different people see the world differently.
But the original statement you made is no two people are alike.
Mm-hmm.
So if no two persons are alike, well then, to my mind, your theory goes through the window.
Yes and no. So part of the issue stems from the fact that within any given group or society, there are groups of people who share similar backgrounds, ways of thinking, and they are a smaller minority within that population that thinks differently. So while on a very basic level we are all different, there are certain characteristics which most people share, and there's a special group that think outside of that box. And neurodiversity speaks to those people.
To what extent, or is it possible for you to say, the group to which you refer that you're calling neurodiverse who think outside of the box, to what extent are they outside of the box? Just on the periphery of the box, or are they kind of half mile away from the box? If you understand the question
Sure.
I want to ask.
So it's a bit of a spectrum. So when we talk about those special people that I'm referring to, we are talking to the people within the autistic community. We're talking to people who have ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, those kinds of conditions that have very particular characteristics around them. And like I said, there's a special group of people who share these characteristics, and it is our aim to highlight them and to show that thinking differently is not a problem, it's not a bad thing, it's not a disorder, it's not an illness. We need
It's
to
not
recognize.
it's not a disorder.
Correct.
It's not an illness.
It is not.
But just for clarification, and you use the term, and it's a term I keep hearing now more than I used to hear it, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the assumption is that we all understand. I'm not sure that my listeners understand.
Mm-hmm.
The spectrum.
Right.
See, whether you could define that for us. When you hear someone is on the spectrum, what do you mean, given your role within this organization?
Sure. So even if I were to take the word outside the realm of neurodiversity, a spectrum really speaks to a beginning and an end, a lower point and a higher point. So what tends to happen with a spectrum is that you have people on a continuum, either at the low end or the high end. And within the neurodiversity community, specifically with autism, there are people, and there's a conversation about a spectrum, where there are some persons who, at the lower end, are able to function with some degree of normalcy within the society. At the higher end of the spectrum, They are people who have certain particular difficulties. Some of them are nonverbal, some of them have developmental challenges, and so on. So, really and truly, it's not a one size fits all, but part of it is understanding where on the spectrum people fall and the kind of support they would need depending on where they fall.
Let's take you up on the word support.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to link that to your particular interest
So,
in this particular group of persons.
mm-hmm.
Why the interest, and why would someone like you or your organization want to do the kinds of work that you're doing?
Right. So the foundation believes that in making accommodations or supporting those that are neurodiverse, we are actually helping everyone. The idea is, instead of focusing on support and help for the persons who are quote-unquote normal or the majority, we should actually be focusing our attention on those in the minority. And by doing so, it's part of the taking care of your brothers and sisters. But in doing so, we're actually helping everyone. And the focus is really to highlight the neurodiverse population, focus on them, and give them the kind of support that they need, which will redound to everyone.
Right. And you've had a week of celebration within recent times.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if celebration is the wrong word.
It's the correct word.
Tell us about, in brief, tell us about the week. What happened? What did you intend to do? And to what extent you've been successful?
Right. So Neurodiversity Celebration Week is celebrated across the world. And this is a week that the neurodiverse community interacts and shares its knowledge, its stories with the rest of the world. In Trinidad, what we were able to do is have a number of workshops online. First one was on neurodiversity in education, where we had persons with specific skills in the education sector talk about the challenges and solutions for neurodiverse children in the classroom. So that was on Wednesday. On Thursday, we had a session on neurodiversity and mental health, because there's a link between persons who are neurodiverse and certain mental health challenges. So again, we had a panel of experts having a conversation with parents, teachers, and so on about that link and things that they need to look out for. And yesterday, I hosted a conversation with a PhD person who did his doctorate in neurodiversity, looking at the impact of neurodiversity on the workforce and how it impacts on employees and employers. So we were able to have those 3 sessions. We had a pretty good turnout online, and we recorded them, and they're online as well for persons to access as well.
So perhaps later on in the conversation, we can discuss how we could share those things with the wider community in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world.
So,
before I get you to introduce the other guests you have, there's a final question I want to ask based on what you have shared with us before. Can you, well, I might have said guess, but you might have scientific information. Can you say what quantum of the population of Trinidad and Tobago you reckon affected? Well, that's the wrong word. who might be neurodiverse?
right. So the research in Trinidad is quite old, and one of our pillars is to actually work on that. But worldwide, it is estimated at anywhere between 5 to 7% of the population, any given population, is neurodiverse.
And you are comfortable using that yardstick for Trinidad and Tobago?
For the time being, until we do our research, and then we'll be a lot more specific.
Right. It is 21 minutes after 7 o'clock. You're tuned to Talk City 91.1 FM. It is Culture Talk, the usual program, every Saturday evening at this time. And I am Short Pants, and you were listening to Jeremy Francis, who is one of the foundation members of the Neurodiversity Foundation. And we will continue chatting with Mr. Francis in just a little bit.
I don't mind we practice the cultures.
24 minutes after 7 o'clock, and it is Culture Talk, and we were chatting a short while ago with Jeremy Francis, who is an advocate for those who are neurodiverse, and he's brought a couple of the gentlemen who are neurodiverse into the studio this evening, and I will ask Mr. Francis, please, to introduce his guests.
Sure. So obviously, if we are a foundation and advocating for a group, who better than to represent the group than persons who are neurodiverse? Right. So I would like to introduce Kent and Michael, two friends of mine. And we've been having conversations over the past few weeks in particular about this issue, and I've invited them to come to the station to have a conversation about their particular area and some of the challenges that they may have had or are having as a result of the neurodiverse conditions.
But you are saying to us, if I understand you correctly, and I hope the listeners are understanding, that the two gentlemen, your two guests, they belong to, or they have been diagnosed with, or they can be considered as neurodiverse.
That is correct.
But looking at them, I couldn't tell. I came in, and you came in with two friends,
yes,
and they look, quote unquote, forgive the term, they look normal,
Yeah.
right? But you are, how do you know? How do you tell me, prove to me that they are in fact neurodiverse?
So they both have been clinically diagnosed with the conditions, and the conditions I would say are autism and the ADHD. So they have clinical diagnoses from specialists to say that they are autistic and has ADHD.
Can they speak to us about their condition? I mean, can they?
They most definitely can.
Right. Well, let's start with Mr. Jerry, right? Mr. Jerry, you've been diagnosed as ADHD.
Correct.
Tell the listeners what do we mean by ADHD?
Well, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactive Disorder. What it basically means is that I have problems, or somebody like that has problems focusing, and are easily distracted and are quite hyperactive.
And if I were to say to you, you're just indisciplined. I mean, how do you say, well, I might say you're making an excuse for your bad behavior then.
That is actually the best question you could ask, because that is what happens when a 10-year-old child is in high school and they're not doing as well as they could. Like me, for example. I mean, I've been a C student most of my life. But my teachers perpetually told me, Kent, you have so much potential. Why aren't you doing better? And the reality of it is that in the old days, I mean, I'm 59 now, but when I was in high school or primary school, it was just considered that I was easily distracted and I was a hyper child, and and just dismissed as lazy or not whatever. But now we realize that we can put it all into a group and not only diagnose but also treat it with different methods.
If I might interrupt you, you're saying, but now, put the now into time for me. When did it happen for you that you are realizing it is not as they're saying to me that I'm ill-disciplined and bad behaved, but I do have a specific condition?
The reality is that I was only diagnosed about 1.5 years ago. All right. However, prior to that, I started to get a lot of things on social media about the ADHD, and started to question and take little tests online and things like that. And everything came back, yes, you're definitely ADHD. So I went to a professional to get it, a proper report done, a proper assessment done, and it came back that I'm extremely ADHD.
So it means that the, let's say, symptoms that manifested themselves when you were at primary and secondary school were not in your own control.
In fact, exactly. That and that's one of the most frustrating things, because now one of the first things they tell you when you do discover you are the ADHD is to blame the ADHD. It's not an excuse, but blame it, because it's a large part of the problem of why things have been the way they have been for you for all this time. You know, what's interesting is that when I found out I had it, there's so many memories I have now that are now explainable. Things that I'm like, well, of course, that's why. It's a revelation.
Give us a couple examples. You know, people are listening,
Well,
and some of the listeners might, in fact, be that way or have their offspring that way. So just see if you could highlight a couple specific instances that could bring it home for us.
Perfect. That's why I'm here, actually, so that people can be, have awareness of this, particularly parents. I'll give you an example. It's very difficult for me to read. If I get up to now, you can send me an email, and that email is more than a paragraph. I ain't reading it. I read text in a book, and after the first sentence, I forgot what that sentence was. My brain has gone somewhere else. You know, one of the biggest signs, and drives my wife and my sister crazy, is that I can't let them finish a sentence. They will ask me a question halfway through the question. I've already calculated every single possible scenario they could possibly ask.
In other words, you've predicted the rest of the question.
I predicted it and found the most suitable answer and started to answer. And why are they taking so long to ask me the damn question? Right. And so that's what it is. And a very typical. Another example is you don't finish things. I get excited about a project. 2 weeks into it, I'm like, I'm bored with that. I'm done. And it never finishes. And that happens a lot. But
you say you have a wife.
And 3 children. Yes.
I hope I'm not manifesting one of the symptoms.
No. But the reality of it is that one of the interesting things is when she did discover this, she got quite upset.
Upset that she married you?
No, upset that all this time she's been blaming me on stuff for stuff that is out of my control.
Right. So she was empathetic.
For about 5 minutes. I enjoyed that 5 minutes, and then it was back to life.
Right.
But can I say though?
Yeah, absolutely.
If if your child is behaving in a way that would have been characteristically lazy or unproductive or unfunctional, check them out, because a lot of times it's completely out of their control. And not only that, it can be corrected. You can do things that will help. You can take medication that will dramatically help. I have friends that have children that are ADHD, and the medication works wonders for them. And it'll change your C student into an A student.
But one of the difficulties, and it comes to mind because you in an area in which I have a particular interest. How do I now determine who is a child who is simply indisciplined, doesn't really have proper social manners, and someone who is ADHD? I am, for example, a teacher, and there are students in the class. How do I make that distinction?
Well, the easy answer is get them assessed. And you can tell right there and then, because I did a full assessment, and it told me, briefly how it works is that everybody has some form of ADHD. It's a scale from 1 to 100, but 60 and below is not considered ADHD, and it's not considered worthy of treatment. Right. So 60 and above, I hit a 90 on that. So I'm pretty extreme. But at the end of the day, a teacher that has an ADHD child, if you understand that and you research about it, there are things you can do that will assist the child and let the child have a much better potential later on. One of the things the psychiatrist told me about that was most profound was, Ken, if you had come here 20 years ago, your life would be extremely different than it is now. Right. I have to work roughly twice as long to achieve the same thing that somebody else would have to do in half half that time because of the distraction.
Because of the condition.
The distractions.
We're not forgetting that we do have another guest in the studio. He is Michael Marshall. Welcome to Talk City and to Culture Talk, Mr. Marshall. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. So much of what I have learned on my own journey in the last 18 months has been from understanding the viewpoints of other autistic people. So I'm hoping today I can probably give back a little bit and contribute some to that.
So you are saying to us as well that you have only recently been diagnosed as autistic.
Correct. I'm 55 and I was diagnosed about 18 months ago. So it means pretty much I have fallen through the cracks my entire life. Kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, university, most of my work life.
What prompted the diagnosis 18 months ago? I mean, you've lived 50 years of your life and you've gotten to this point. What, if you don't mind, sharing with us the circumstances that brought you to a point where you are now diagnosed?
Right. So what tends to happen is that you function until you are no longer able to. So there are most likely people out there who are autistic and they cope. In my particular case, that failing happened over a period of time. I would suggest about 15 years. One, I got very burnt out in my job. I did not understand the concept of self-care, taking a break, and recovering. So I was having what I now understand to be an autistic burnout, and then that was followed by raising my children. I started with one child that turned into 2 children, and then 3. And as we know, children are not predictable and organized. So that combination, it resulted in a number of difficulties in my marriage. Because of my burnout, what tends to happen is your executive functioning starts to collapse. Executive functioning is your ability to sort of self-manage, to organize yourself, to do time management, to deal with multitasking, to control the emotions and so forth. So when that starts to collapse, you become withdrawn as a human being, you fail to participate. And then what happens is that from the viewpoint of your spouse, you're seen as being lazy, non-participant, not interested in the marriage, not contributing.
Selfish.
Selfish. So you come across as that, basically.
But let's see whether we could, if you don't mind, share a little bit of your life before you got to that point. How did you manage? Because clearly you manage and you seem to have gone through school, had an education, got married, had at least one child. How was that for you?
Right. So it's easier to cope without those additional responsibilities. So before marriage, I am a single individual. So I would have 1 or 2 friends. You would travel. You have a job. So it's easier to do. And earlier on, I would not have difficulty with. I would not have had a challenge with a burnout, as it were. So that tends to come over a period of time.
How was school?
School was average. I was always middle of the road, very below the radar. No one paid attention. I would just sort of somehow get through school.
And were you comfortable with your life? I mean, did you think that anything was wrong with you?
You felt different. You knew you were different. You had no idea why. I would not be interested in team sports. I would not be interested in football. I would not be interested in cricket, which was the traditional interest of the boys at the time. Anything I did would be a solo sport, whether it be running or kayaking. So you know you're different. You still have 1 or 2 friends that you chat with, But life is different. You want to live a sort of a solitary and experience. You're not interested in the social activities. You're not interested in friends. You're not necessarily interested in going out and lineman.
And this was how your existence had been.
That's how it had been, and how it is now as well.
And then the crisis came. Share with us, and this is my terminology. You probably know better and you can correct me. How did the crisis come?
The point at which the
point at which you are
I'm feeling.
right, and it becomes necessary for you to seek help. Then
our marriage starts to fall apart.
Oh, that's how it was for you.
Basically, yes, because we have kids. My wife is struggling to understand why I am not participating. Why am I being lazy in quotes? Why am I being difficult? Why am I unable to take care of myself when I have the responsibility of taking care of kids?
Right.
And it starts to unravel. So and that goes on pretty much for about 7 years until we finally end up in counseling. And she managed to patch us up. She suggested a diagnosis because about a decade earlier, my child's kindergarten teacher suggested to her, hey, your husband might be autistic. And
or it was the teacher?
A kindergarten teacher.
Right.
And the reason she said that was because while everyone was waiting to collect their child after school, I was the only one with my back turned looking out to the road because the wrecker would be passing. It was taking cars. And I was more concerned that I'm going to lose my car or I'm going to have to pay a fee of $1,000. And everyone else waiting for their kids, were oblivious to the danger, as it were. And it was just that observation.
Your difference stood out at that point in time. It
stood out, yeah.
Right. It is 18 minutes before 8 o'clock. You're tuned to Talk City 91.1 FM. And this evening, we're having a conversation about neurodiversity. In the studio, Jeremy Francis, Kent Jerry, and Michael Marshall. And the conversation will continue. And as usual, listeners, we will not leave you out. We will take your questions or comments at 622-4911, 622-4911 in just a little bit.
Steel pan and limbo dance. Jazz drumming is ours also. Yes. Let's give them their growing chance. We must show more love for the things we own. For their future is our concern. So let me love. And give praise to the limbo and believe in this for the next generation.
Yeah, join me tomorrow at 1 o'clock when I open the doors of the Kaiso Cafe. This evening, and it's already 13 minutes before 8 o'clock, Jeremy Francis, Michael Marshall, and Kent Jerry share the spotlight with us on Culture Talk. And I want to go back to Jeremy Francis and the foundation and something he said earlier about all-inclusivity, all-inclusiveness. That is what you were saying, driving what you are doing. And we've had your two guests, one ADHD, that's Kent Jerry, and Michael Marshall, who is autistic. And we thanking them both for sharing some of their stories. How does that add justification, if you want, to your work?
So the main thing is having people understand that the things that both Kent and Michael shared are normal things. we are trying to create a safe space for persons who are neurodiverse to express the challenges that they are having so that they are not judged but understood. That is a big part of it. Part of the issue around neurodiversity is that people, even when they think they feel afraid to express it because the overwhelming response is negative. The foundation is trying to change that by having people like Kent and Michael speak openly about their experiences in the hope that listeners will recognize some of what they're saying, recognize it in themselves, one, recognize it in their kids, in their family members, and stop judging people based on what they are seeing, but have a different lens of understanding around it and be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate.
Kent, if I come back to you, so just share a little bit more. You are adult. You work. Do you work among people? How do you earn your daily bread?
I'm actually self-employed. I'm a software engineer. I have a company that we develop software to be used by businesses in Trinidad.
But you have a team. You
I
have
have a whole
you have
team.
people with
Yeah.
whom you work.
Correct.
You're the quote unquote. You're the boss. You manage people. How do they cope with you?
It's
Or how do you think they cope with you?
okay. Well, my wife is the general manager. She tends to deal with me, even though some frustration is involved. But she tends to deal with me. I do deal now with other developers who are programmers, and we have a certain way of talking and understanding things, which it works out well for me. But I am a problem from time to time in meetings where if a meeting runs on too long, I'm starting to get distracted and I'm checking on email and I'm useless.
But you said a problem, and it's interesting that you use that term. Why do you think it's a problem? Why are you defining it as a problem?
Because sometimes I can disrupt communication because I have lost interest in the conversation, or I have been distracted by something else. Or one of the things you find with ADHD people is their brain moves quite quickly. And a lot of times, if somebody's asking, like I say, somebody's asking me a question, I can't wait for them to finish. I get frustrated, you know. And listening is a problem. So it's hard for me to listen to people, you know. Often I like I say, the biggest thing I do is jump in and don't let people finish talking.
Now that you have, and you're saying that the diagnosis is a recent one, now that there has been the diagnosis, and I'm assuming you have accepted the diagnosis, right? What have you changed?
Well, for one, I can blame it on the ADHD. So, which of course sounds like a cop out because it's kind of it's a little bit.
Yeah, but it only sounds like that.
It's a little oxymoronic,
right.
but
Right.
because they tell you blame it on ADHD. That's why, of course, you know, not everybody believes that, but it was a relief because, you know, I have felt as an underachiever for most of my life, and because you know you can do so much more, and there's something stopping you, and now you've just found out what it was, and then you can do something about it. Now I've been trying different medications. Unfortunately, the only things available in Trinidad do not work on me. So I'm now managed to get some different medication from the US that I've just started this week.
I want to interrupt you. You know, the only thing available in Trinidad. Let me interpret that. Let me put it another way. There is medication. It's just that you can't get it in Trinidad. That's what you're saying. I'm making sure that I understand you.
There are many variants. The stuff that they use here in Trinidad that's available for ADHD people doesn't really work on adults. It's more for children at a lower age, and it had no effect on me. I went from 36 milligrams a day up to 108 milligrams a day, and nothing worked. It didn't have anything.
And part of that has to be the perception, perhaps, of what ADHD is all about. Jeremy, you think so? That's how it sounds to me. right?
So a lot of the research work and studies have been done on children.
Right.
Most times, if you look online, most of the references are with kids.
Yeah.
People forget, though, that kids grow up.
Right. Right.
So
And you don't grow out of the condition.
that
doesn't
is
go away.
correct. That is also correct.
Right.
So there's a generation of people who never even knew what it was, have become adults, and have recognized.
Right.
And they went through their entire lives not knowing. There's another generation who, as kids, have gotten a lot of information, medication, and so on, but there's a gap between those two groups.
Right. Right. I want to move on to talk a little bit about to talk to Michael. That's Michael Marshall, who has been diagnosed, is the correct term, as being autistic. And let me share some personal perspectives, and I hope you're not offended by what I would say. But, I mean, looking at you and talking at you, I would not have thought that you were autistic. And clearly that has to be whatever has been in my head as to what an autistic person looks like or sounds like or feels like. Now I am hearing it's different, because to all intent and purposes, I'm looking and chatting with you, and you look and sound normal. Respond to what I've just said, if you can respond.
It's a behavioral diagnosis. So to tell that someone is autistic, you need to look at them, look at their behavior, to interpret. You cannot do a blood test, for example, and say someone is autistic. So what I'm saying is that our condition exists in our head. It's a neurodevelopmental variation in how we develop. Our brains develop differently. They're wired physically differently from everyone else. And it's a condition that's existing within our head. So you can't, or it is difficult sometimes to look at someone and say, this particular person is autistic or this one is not. Because the things that you struggle with, your inability to communicate effectively, your inability to want to be socially interactive, your sensory issues, your sensitivity or lack of sensitivity to light, sound, taste, smell, your desire to be routine-oriented, all of these things don't display themselves externally, or in a very obvious way sometimes.
It manifested itself, however, and stop me if I go off, with your wife, because of the relationships that husbands and wives have.
Yes.
Husbands and wives have. Because of that, there are some things that your wife became intimately aware of, but Jeremy or Kent wouldn't have. I wouldn't have.
Right.
But since you share certain kinds of intimacies with a partner,
Correct.
then the things come into focus.
Correct. And then we do something called masking as well.
Right.
Which is basically an attempt to appear to be normal. And that is taught to autistic kids as they grow up. So you're taught not to stim, not to behave in a particular way, and to basically act normal so that you fit into society and you function. Now, you cannot be masking 100% of the time. So at home, you're going to have to be more yourself. Some masking may be required because my wife is an adult, and she is not going to want to interact with someone who is particularly silly all of the time. So you have to determine when to mask and when not to mask. But she would be more intimate, and yes, she would have more of an awareness of my particular condition being that close to me.
And of course, because of the love she has for you, ultimately there's the frustration.
Yes. Well, I've told her it's too late for her at this point in time. After 23 years and 3 kids. So
That should say that.
2 minutes before 8 o'clock, and I want to keep my promise. I do not want to leave the listeners out. So we want to invite the listeners. The number is 622-4911. 622-4911. You've heard from Jeremy Francis and the kind of work that his foundation wants to do. It's the kind of thing that we feel we want to complement, the kind of selfless contributions that some people make to the society. And of course, you had the two gentlemen, Michael Marshall and Kent Jerry, who have shared their individual stories with us. And you might want something clarified, a little bit more of an explanation, or you want to ask some other kind of question. Now is the time you can call us at 622-4911, 622-4911.
When we look to the future, instead we're on the road to a brand new world. Yeah, Papa, yeah, oh, 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 yeah, Papa, yeah, lembo, 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 Papa, yeah.
Education, education, this is the foundation. Our rising population needs sound education to be recognized anywhere you go. You got to have your certificate to show, to enjoy any kind of happiness. Knowledge is the key to success. Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you will get real hell without an education in your head.
Good evening, welcome.
Good night, Mr. Shortman.
Good evening, yeah.
Good night.
Yeah, good night. We're hearing you.
Right. The gentleman, the autistic gentleman there,
Uh-huh.
it's so amazing. 23 years, you have 3 children. Are the children normal or they...
You'd like to find out whether his children are autistic as well.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, sure. Thanks very much for calling and thanks for the question. All right. I'll get him to answer in a little bit. Mr. Marshall, you heard the question. The caller wants to find out whether your children are quote-unquote normal. I mean, she wants to find out whether your children have been diagnosed as being autistic, or if you suspect it. Maybe you could share some of that with us.
Right. So as we know, the apple does not fall far from the tree. We have not had a diagnosis for anyone.
That statement is a little bit ambiguous, meaning that you haven't taken them to be diagnosed, or you...
We have not taken them to be diagnosed.
Right.
All right. They do exhibit some traits that I am familiar with, but
How old are the children and what are their sexes?
we have a girl who is 16, a boy who is 14, and a boy who is 10.
Right.
Okay. And they're quite happy. They're in secondary school. They have their friends. They're doing well in school.
And you are quite happy.
And we're quite happy. So there's no need to go through the process of saying,
you don't trouble unless trouble troubles you.
Exactly. You know, if in the future there's an issue where we say, possibly this is something we can look at.
In other words, the diagnosis would not come when they reach 55.
Oh, hopefully not.
Right. Okay. Mr. Jerry, a similar kind. Let me ask this similar kind of question. You also have 3 children.
Yes.
Just share with us their ages and their sexes and your particular view of them at this stage.
I have 3 boys. They are 23, 21, and just turned 18 yesterday. My oldest one is also ADHD.
And how do you know that?
Because we had him assessed.
You had him assessed, right?
He when he was in Fatima, he was having little problems handling the education system and how it was and whatnot. So we did a full assessment on him. And one of the things that came out was that he was ADHD.
Right.
And we actually moved him to a different school that was done a little differently. Instead of having 8 subjects for the whole term, they had it down to 4 one term and 4 the next term. And he dramatically improved.
And he coped with that.
He dramatically improved his overall average and everything like that.
Right.
His ADHD, I don't think, is as severe as mine. I think he got a piece of what I have, so to speak. But my other 2, I don't think they have it at
You
all.
don't think so at all?
No.
Well, not at this stage anyway. Which prompts me to ask Mr. Francis, and it comes from what I was just asking Mr. Jerry. Is it possible? Well, we have 2 guests. And in both instances, they were diagnosed late in life. The question I want to ask, and I almost said the stupid question, but I tell all the people around me there's no such thing as a stupid question. So let me still ask the question, although it might be a stupid one. Is it possible not to have these symptoms? In other words, not to have the condition. That's what I want to ask. And then you get the condition? Or is the condition a lifelong thing? If you understand my question.
Yeah. So it is a lifelong thing. And one of the issues is in relation to what Michael talked about, this issue of masking. And there's also issues with your environment. So one of the things I've become aware of is that if you are in a home environment where food is a problem, shelter is a problem, you're struggling to make ends meet, and your children are having issues with diet and being able to eat, some of those behavioral traits are very similar to autism or ADHD. So the child might actually not be autistic or have ADHD, but because of those deprivations, it is very similar.
I want to ask you, please, because you're striking a chord. And I'm saying that because I've spent a lot of my life in education. And part of what we're doing tonight really is an attempt to educate.
Right.
And I want to ask you just to repeat some of what you just said, not some of what. I want to ask you to repeat what you just said, because it's ringing. You wouldn't believe how it's ringing. So please repeat yourself.
Sure. So there's research to show that persons who are in a deprived situation, either in terms of food, shelter, clothing, and so on, some of the behaviors that you will see in those types of situations actually mirror some of the symptoms that you will see in ADHD and autism and some of the other neurodiverse conditions. So a couple of things could be happening. These children and adults can be neurodiverse, but they could also be in a deprived state, right? The way that we treat with these things, at least from a foundation's perspective, is that we need to make assessments more readily available and cheaper, so that as soon as we have these issues, we can get people tested. This is separate and apart from making sure that everyone has enough food to eat and a safe place to live, which I think is a fundamental human right in any event, right? But barring that, we need to be able to make testing accessible, because I am sure a number of your listeners have either themselves or know people very similar to what these 2 gentlemen have shared. And if they wanted to find out more, getting tested could be extremely expensive. And it is a deterrent.
But it shouldn't be.
Shouldn't be, I agree.
There's a question, another question. This person has sent their question via text, and it is a question to Mr. Francis. Does puberty impact when and how the condition exhibits itself? I hope I've read it well.
Right.
Does puberty impact when and how the condition exhibits itself?
So that is a question that is better asked to one of my other able directors, Dr. Stacey Leger, who is a medical doctor that treats with this specifically. What I
Right.
will say, though, is that puberty as an entity in and of itself, hormonal changes.
Right.
So again, when
Right.
you add those things into the mix, if I am autistic or ADHD, chances are hormones changing is going to have some impact on my behavior.
But that, if I may say, is linked to a question I asked before, and you threw my question out of the window. Because the question I was asking is, could the condition develop at a later rather than an earlier stage in life? But if you are saying that puberty could affect it, it could affect it either negatively or positively. Am I correct? I mean, while you are saying that we needed the doctor, the medical person, but from your understanding, how would you respond to that question?
So what I would say is that neurodiversity exists in a person. There are a number of things that will affect its presentation. Some of it are environmental. So I talked about the food issue, the shelter issue, and so on. Some of it is also biological, so puberty and those kind of things. Some of it is life experience. So as Michael said, when he was younger and he didn't have as much responsibilities, he was coping a lot better. As he got more responsibilities, he started having challenges. So it wasn't as though he became more autistic in a sense.
Right.
He was
Right.
autistic,
Right.
but the
Right.
circumstances around him.
Cause it to manifest
Yeah.
itself. Right. Got you. Right. I want to come to each of you, and I would start with Mr. Jerry, and then I'll come across and end with Mr. Francis, because that's how it is, and time has in fact run out on us. You have lived your life, you two gentlemen, you have both been diagnosed later rather than early in life. You now have to make adjustments, you now have to live a different kind of life. You've now been on Talk City 91.1 FM talking about the condition. At this point in time, if you had to say something to anyone, to the state, to the Ministry of Education, to the public at large, to me as the host, what would you say? Mr. Jerry, I come to you first.
I would definitely say that there needs to be more awareness of this. Not only that, it needs to be easier for somebody to get assessed and found out. It is very expensive to get assessed, and I had to go and call a whole bunch of different people, and some of them didn't take me on, and it was difficult. It was difficult. The one thing I would like to suggest to parents, that if you suspect your child may have ADHD, go online, Google it. There's many little tests and quizzes that you can do, that if they answer sufficiently, you know there's something up and you need to find a way to check it. With regard to the treatment, it is a little frustrating that the medication that I need, I have to go through a foreign doctor and get a prescription in the US and have a friend bring it down for me and pick it up with my ID and all of that for medication that should be available here. And it's available in the other islands. I can get stuff in Barbados that I can't get in Trinidad. I don't know why this is. You could speculate. I believe the pharmaceutical companies don't have the license to bring in these particular products. Why that is, I can't see. But that would be very helpful.
Kent, Jerry, thank you so very, very much. Michael Marshall?
So, based on the statistics that Jeremy gave initially, that there could be 3 to 5% of the population with
5 to 7. 5 to 7.
Right? We're talking 40,000 to 60,000 people, many of whom may not be aware of what they're struggling with. They go to work, they go through life not realizing that it's more difficult for them. So if any of this sounds familiar to you, I would encourage them to go online, do some of the tests that are available, see if this sounds familiar, see if this resonates with you, and as far as possible, try and get yourself tested, because it's gonna make your life a whole lot easier if you have an understanding. That is the starting point to change, to try and improve yourself, to understand what is happening with you. And then, and only then, would you have the opportunity to say, hey, what can I do to make myself or my environment a bit better?
Michael Marshall, thank you so very, very much. And last but definitely by no means least, Jeremy Francis, who has undertaken to found this foundation. Some people are shy. We have a late question. Let's
Sorry about that.
you need to hang up
Yeah.
turn off the radio, please, and ask the question. The radio is still
Where did you
on.
get the men, those fellas, to find out how they are right now?
You have the radio on, and therefore we can't hear you properly. I'm sorry about that. I don't know. He wanted to ask something, but he not following the basic rules. Unfortunately, I was about to say, Mr. Francis, very, very commendable work that your organization is doing. But from what we've been able, just a little we've been able, we've only touched the surface tonight. There's a lot of work ahead.
Yes. Yes, a lot of work. But I have to make mention to the two other founding directors, Andrew McIntosh and Dr. Stacey Leger. They are both abroad, but they are fully invested. We talk very often. We have plans and programs that we're running. What I want to ask, though, is that everyone who's listening, if we can give each other some grace and some space. A lot of the things that both gentlemen talked about are things that a lot of families are struggling with, and we tend to have very antagonistic, confrontational relationships with the people that we love. I'm not saying that either you or your family member is neurodiverse, but I think we need to start looking at problems that we're having, not as it's your fault, but what is causing this behavior? What is the issue? And have a different type of conversation. It could be that the person is neurodiverse. But coming back to my original point, if we assume that everyone is neurodiverse and we treat them with that level of respect, people who are not neurodiverse will also benefit. Let us be able to give each other some grace and some space. Be able to forgive each other for some of the, transgressions that we will have in our relationships, but also understand that there could be something else in the mix that is causing this behavior, and we need to start focusing on that.
And anyone listening and would like to get some more information and would like to contact the foundation, do you have a phone number? Do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook page? Please share that information with us.
Sure. So the best way to get us would be via email at foundation.neurodiversity@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page that you can message us at, the Neurodiversity Foundation. You may just want to probably put Trinidad in there because there are a few of them around the world, so that it will center you on our page. We're also on LinkedIn, same, the Neurodiversity Foundation. And the best way to contact us right now is social media. As we get more volunteers and more help, we will have other avenues, but that would be the best way to get onto us for now.
Just give us the foundation dot, you said,
Neurodiversity at gmail.com.
at Gmail, the email
Yes.
address. That's what I wanted to ask.
Yes.
At gmail.com. Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. Mr. Kent, Jerry, Mr. Michael Marshall, and Mr. Jeremy Francis. A pleasure having you on Culture Talk this evening on Talk City 91.1 FM. I want to thank the two gentlemen for sharing the things. I have to ask myself some questions. I don't know if I was in one of your situations, whether I would be so willing to come and share. And I want to thank and compliment you for that in assisting the education process. And as I said earlier, Jeremy Francis, the work that your foundation is doing, I want to encourage you to continue. Congratulations to you all, and thank you all very, very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.